Hey there guys, so Amazon is currently having their Black Friday deals live all this week, and so far I have been waiting to see what kind of deals would actually end up popping up. I'll be real with y'all, this Black Friday has been kind of disappointing, though it's not that surprising. Here in the United States, we're kind of expecting to see some major tariffs end up hitting for a lot of devices like this. And because of that, sales prices aren't exactly looking incredible because a lot of these companies are really going to end up raising their prices. So really, if these tariffs actually end up hitting the way that so far a lot of speculation is looking at, prices for a lot of these devices are looking to go up pretty dramatically. So that's why we're not exactly seeing some great sales. But this also means this might be one of the last times you'll really be able to get any sort of major discount off of any of these devices. At least in terms of mini PCs, some of the more interesting deals out there are things like the Beelink EQR6, which is a system with a Ryzen 9 6900HX that comes with 24 gigabytes of memory and a 1TB SSD for $400. This is a pretty rock solid price since you're getting the 680M, which means you are getting a pretty capable integrated graphics. It has 24 gigabytes of RAM, which is honestly more than enough. Really, as long as you have more than 16 gigabytes of RAM on a mini PC like this, it ends up being a pretty great situation because you can allocate 4 gigabytes of RAM to the iGPU and you still have 20 left over for the full system. Though I will say one of the downsides of this specific setup is that you kind of have a lot more limited selection in terms of USB port, specifically because it does go with the dual Ethernet jacks, which, considering that it's just gigabit, it's not 2.5 gigabit, I would rather have faster USB ports, but really that's just the configuration that they went with here. That's why if you are looking to save some money, you can actually get the GMKtec M7 here with the 6850H, and this actually has a far better configuration in terms of I/O, because you do of course get the front USB 4, but you also get the Oculink port. But the downside here is that you only get 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD, which is why it's currently $360 with a 5% off coupon on it. But it is also extremely easy to upgrade. And of course, on Amazon, if you have been looking for anything that is rocking even remotely modern hardware, you're still looking at some pretty insane prices. As of right now, there is pretty much no mini PC available on Amazon with AMD's HX series of processors. You're not going to be getting yourself a 370 mini PC on Amazon. You can buy it directly from these manufacturers, but you can't get it on Amazon. From Beelink, they do have their GTI 14 mini PCs here with the Ultra 9 185H, and that is 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 1TB SSD, and this thing is a whopping $850. Do not buy this. Please do not buy this. This is too expensive. This is way too expensive. All of these AI series mini PCs are absolutely overpriced. They're really ridiculous, whether they are AMD or Intel. They are ridiculous prices right now that it just makes way more sense to make yourself an ITX computer unless you're trying to go for as low of a power usage as possible. But that's such a niche use case where you need an ultra powerful CPU, decent enough integrated graphics, and you're not willing to just go with a slightly bigger box. There's just really no point in buying this. Now, Beelink also has their EQR6 mini PC, and that is with a Ryzen 5 6600H, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a 500 gigabyte SSD. At $280, this is again the entry point for mini PC gaming. Please do not buy any Vega based mini PC if gaming is anything that you truly care about. At this price point, it's a better buy than something like this. Even though this has 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 1TB SSD, this will not give you as good a gaming performance as this. So you get a cheaper device that's going to perform better. The CPU here is not going to be as powerful. If gaming is what you care about, the iGPU is going to be a limiting factor before the CPU ever really ends up becoming a limiting factor. And of course, the GMK GMKtec G3 is currently available for $200 with, again, a 5% off coupon for this specific system. And this is the 16 gigabyte version with a 1 terabyte SSD, and this is a really great configuration. Yes, you could find it cheaper if you want to go with just 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. That's a really great price as well for it. But in all honesty, you go with this, you won't really ever need to open this thing up and upgrade anything ever again for the lifetime of this system, while 256 gigabytes of storage might actually end up being a problem for you. So if you're someone that doesn't feel comfortable popping open their computer and putting in a new SSD because you feel like you might damage something, or you really just don't know how to upgrade your SSD without losing everything that's already on there, then at $200 with a 5% off coupon makes this a very, very rock solid deal. But from that price point, you can just spend an extra $70 and jump up to having something like the Beelink EQR6. That being said, if you are looking for a mini PC that has some of the more recent Intel processors, this right here is Meteor Lake. This is not Lunar Lake, so it's not the absolute best that they have currently available, at least in terms of integrated graphics, but this is a 14 core CPU. And of course, it does have a 1 terabyte SSD and 32 gigabytes of RAM, and at $600 with an extra 5% off coupon, this actually is pretty great. Specifically, if you're using anything Adobe related, this is actually a lot of crazy performance. Like if you're using Photoshop to this day, I still find works better on Intel processors than it does on AMD. So if you want a mini PC that can handle Photoshop, that can handle Premiere, this is pretty great, because also Intel's integrated graphics are very well supported in Adobe Premiere as opposed to something from AMD. It's certainly gotten a lot better than it was before, but as it stands right now, Intel is still the better option for Adobe products in particular. And this is pretty much going to be one of the best prices that you can find, especially since this actually comes with good storage and RAM configuration. And of course, it is not on sale for any kind of discount or anything like that, but Apple 2024 Mac Mini is actually now one of the most powerful mini PCs that you can buy on the market for the price. And since it now comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM by default, you're not even paying the Apple tax of only getting 8 gigabytes of RAM for anything less than about $1,000. But storage is a lot easier of a problem to deal with than trying to upgrade the memory on something like this. See, you could always buy a 4 terabyte external SSD if you wanted to, but you can't do the same thing with soldered memory modules. And at $560, the raw performance that you're getting out of this thing, especially for the wattage that it's using, is insane. You're looking at a computer that is going to be faster than anything in its price category while consuming less power and not making any noise. The biggest downside is literally just those 256 gigabytes of SSD storage, but again, buy yourself an external SSD. You get a 1 terabyte for very cheap. 4 terabytes is where you start to run into getting ripped off in terms of price points, but usually around the holidays, you can find at least one model that is at a reasonable enough discount that it would really make this worthwhile. But that's pretty much the deals going on right now. Again, it's not a remarkable Black Friday in terms of mini PCs. Most companies are kind of freaking out right now because of those tariffs, so don't expect prices to get any better than this. If you've been waiting for a mini PC, now is the time to buy, especially because we don't really know what next year is going to look like in terms of prices. Things are looking pretty volatile there, and I think that if you are waiting on a magical deal, it's likely not going to come. So I would try to snag one of these types of deals right now if that's something that you want, or if you plan on waiting this stuff out, just know that you might be in for a pretty rough ride, because I suspect that a lot of these deal prices that we're looking at here, we're never going to see again for some of these devices. They will sooner leave the market before they go cheaper than this. But I'll talk about all of that more in a dedicated video coming up, but I'll leave a link to some of the better deals going on right now down below. But like I said, there's not really that many remarkable deals to be found right now in terms of mini PCs.